The gavel came down so hard that Dorothy Boone felt it in her back teeth. And still, Aaron Dunlap did not move from where he stood at the front of the Alma Vista courtroom, arms crossed over his chest like a man daring the whole territory to argue with him. "Mr. Dunlap." Judge Elias Marrow's voice carried the particular patience of a man who had ridden 2 days through mud to hold this circuit court and did not intend to leave without a ruling. "You resigned your badge rather than do a wrong thing at this mayor's asking. I remember that. Half this county remembers that. It is exactly why I am ordering you, and not some deputy I do not know, to see this evidence and this boy safely to Fort Union. I am not a lawman anymore, Your Honor." Aaron's jaw was tight enough to crack walnuts. "I am a rancher with 40 head dying in my own pasture and no time to play escort on a 60-mile road in the middle of hail season. Which is precisely why Miss Boone is going with you." The judge turned his gaze, not unkindly, toward Dorothy. "She is the one who found the poison in the first place. She will testify to it at Fort Union, in front of the post surgeon and whatever territorial inspector he can raise. Or this whole business dies quietly, the way Silas Creed wants it to." Dorothy Boone had buried a father, doctored more sick and dying animals than she could count, and faced down men twice her size who did not believe a woman had any business with a scalpel and a suture needle, and none of it had prepared her for the particular indignity of being handed off like a crate of dry goods. "I do not need an escort, Your Honor," she said. "I have ridden this road alone a dozen times." "Not with a 14-year-old boy and a tin box that Silas Creed would very much like to see at the bottom of the Cimarron Wash," the judge said. "You will both go. That is not a request, and I would remind you both that the road between here and Fort Union has flooded twice already this summer, and it is only the middle of July." Aaron looked at Dorothy for the first time since she had walked into the courtroom that morning. It was not a friendly look. It was the look of a man measuring a stranger he had been ordered to trust with his life and hers with his. "Fine," he said, "but I make the decisions on the road." "You do not," Dorothy said, before the judge could even open his mouth. "You make the decisions about your rifle and your horse. I make the decisions about the boy's health, the evidence, and my own person. That is the whole of it." The judge, watching the two of them square off in front of his bench, allowed himself the smallest smile a tired circuit judge could afford. "Court is adjourned," he said. "Try not to kill each other before you reach the fort. I am told there is enough killing already in this business." 3 weeks before that gavel fell, Aaron Dunlap had ridden into the yard behind Dorothy Boone's rented room above the Alma Vista Mercantile, dust to his hat brim, and had not bothered to dismount before he asked his question. "I hear you are the horse doctor's daughter, the one who does the doctoring herself now." Dorothy had been mending a bridle strap on the porch step, and she did not look up right away. She had learned in 3 years of riding this road alone with a case of instruments and a stubborn mule that men who rode up fast and talked faster were rarely worth answering quickly. "I am Dorothy Boone," she said. "I doctor livestock, not horses only, and I do not do it for free." "I did not come here expecting free," Aaron had said. "I have got 40 head of cattle going down with something that is not blackleg and is not anthrax, and the closest army veterinarian is 3 days' ride and busy besides. I need somebody who knows what she is looking at." "Then you had better hope I am as good as they say," Dorothy had answered and stood, and gone to saddle her mule. She remembered the ride out to his ranch better than she wanted to admit, months later. He had not talked much, which she appreciated, and when they crested the last rise and she saw the state of his herd scattered thin and trembling across the pasture, she had forgotten entirely that he was a stranger and gone straight to work. The first steer she examined was down on its side, foam at its mouth, legs paddling weakly at nothing. Aaron had knelt across from her without being asked, one strong hand pinning the animal's head steady against the ground so she could look at its eyes and its gums. "You know how to hold an animal," she had said, surprised. "I know how to do most things that need doing on a ranch," he had said. "What I do not know is what is killing my cattle. It is not disease." She had drawn a small vial of the steer's blood, held it to the light, watched the way it settled strangely in the glass. "This is poison. Something metallic, arsenic most like, or an arsenic compound." She looked up at him, and for a moment their faces were close over the suffering animal, rain starting to needle down around them, and something in his eyes changed from suspicion to something closer to fear. "Where do you dose your cattle from? Who sold you your tonic?" "Creed's Frontier Supply," Aaron had said slowly. "Same as every rancher on this road. There is nowhere else to buy it within 4 days' ride." That was the moment, though neither of them knew it yet, that the trouble truly began. She had stayed 3 days at his ranch that first visit, sleeping in the small loft above his barn while his 3 hands, Tomas and Wyatt and a quiet young man named Pete, worked themselves ragged trying to separate the sick animals from the well. She had noticed, on the second morning, that none of the men had eaten a proper meal in 2 days because they had all been too busy to cook, and Aaron himself looked gray with exhaustion and grief he did not name. "When did you last sleep past 4 in the morning?" She had asked him, setting a pan on his cold stove and going through his shelves without asking permission, the way she had learned to do on a dozen ranches where nobody else would take charge of the kitchen while the men worked themselves into the ground. "Cannot recall," Aaron had said. "Sit down, Mr. Dunlap. Eat something. A rancher who cannot stand up straight is no use to a sick herd." He had looked at her the way a man looks at someone who has walked into his house and started giving orders. And then, because he was tired down to his bones, and the smell of the beans and cornbread she had thrown together was better than anything his own hands had managed in a week, he had sat down and eaten. "You cook like you have fed a crew before," he had said. "I fed my father's crew at Fort Union for 6 years, and half a dozen cattle drive outfits after that, before I could afford my own instruments," Dorothy had said. "A vet who cannot also keep men fed is not much use out here. Men do not work sick, and they do not think straight hungry, and half the mistakes that kill livestock happen because some exhausted hand mixed the wrong dose or missed a symptom he would have caught rested." Aaron had not answered that, but she had seen him watching her differently after that meal, and she had felt, against her own better judgment, a small warm coal of something kindle in her chest at the sight of a strong, careful man finally letting someone else carry a little of his weight. By the time she left his ranch that first week, 4 of his steers were dead, but the rest were stabilizing on clean water she had insisted they haul from the far spring instead of the tainted well near the barn, and she had a sample bottle of Creed's tonic sealed in wax, along with a growing suspicion that Aaron's herd was not the only one dying of it. She had ridden the road for 2 more weeks after that, visiting 5 other ranches, and at every one she had found the same story: sick cattle. The same tonic bottle on the shelf, and at the last ranch, the smallest one, belonging to a widow named Alvarez 2 days short of Fort Union, she had found something worse. A boy of 14 named Sammy Reyes, who had worked mucking stalls at Creed's supply station until 3 weeks ago, told her in a shaking voice that he had seen Mr. Creed's foreman mixing the tonic himself, out back by the old alkali spring, using water that had killed 2 of the company's own mules the year before. "Mr. Creed said the water was fine for the tonic even if it was not fine for drinking," Sammy had told her, twisting his hat in his hands. "He said cattle were tougher than mules and nobody would ever know the difference, and if I told anybody, he would see me run out of the territory as a thief." That was the confession that had brought Dorothy back to Alma Vista at a hard gallop, the boy riding pillion behind her, the sealed sample bottle wrapped in oilcloth in her saddlebag, and straight to Judge Merrow's courtroom, where she had learned, to her considerable irritation, that the judge intended to attach Aaron Dunlap to her like a burr to a saddle blanket for the whole dangerous ride to Fort Union. They left Alma Vista at first light the next morning, the sky already stacking thunderheads in the west, though it was not yet 7 o'clock. Aaron drove the light spring wagon with Sammy Reyes beside him, the tin evidence box wedged under the seat and covered with a horse blanket. Dorothy rode her mule alongside, her instrument case and a second, smaller box of her own notes and affidavits lashed behind her saddle. "You could ride in the wagon," Aaron said, "an hour out of town. It would be easier on you." "I have ridden this road more times than you have," Dorothy said. "The mule and I understand each other. Save your worrying for the boy." "I am not worrying. I am being practical. You are deciding things for me, Mr. Dunlap, which the judge did not order you to do." He did not answer that, but she saw his jaw tighten, and she filed the moment away the way she filed every small thing about this man, half against her will. The military road between Alma Vista and Fort Union had been cut through the territory a decade before, wide enough for freight wagons and army supply trains, linking the fort to a scatter of homesteads, a stage stop, and Creed's supply station roughly at its midpoint. In dry weather it was a tolerable 2.5 days' ride. In the thunderstorm season, when the arroyos that crossed it filled without warning and hail could flatten a man's hat brim to his skull, it could take twice that, or kill a careless traveler outright. They made good time the first day, camping that night in the lee of a sandstone bluff while heat lightning walked the horizon in silent white flashes. Sammy fell asleep almost as soon as he had eaten, worn thin by fear and travel, and for a while Dorothy and Aaron sat on either side of the small fire without speaking, the tin evidence box between them like a third presence. "You really think Creed knew?" Aaron said finally. "Knew and sold it anyway." "I know he knew," Dorothy said. "The boy watched him do it, and I have seen the ledger pages he kept at his station before he caught me looking and threw me off his property. He buys the alkali spring water for nothing because nobody else will touch it, and it stretches his tonic supply twice as far as clean water would. He is not an ignorant man poisoning cattle by accident, Mr. Dunlap. He is a careful man doing arithmetic with other people's herds. And my wife's fever," Aaron said, so quietly she almost missed it over the crackle of the fire, "started the same summer he built that station and started selling water rights to half the ranches on this road." Dorothy went very still. "Your wife?" "Emily." He said the name like it still cost him something. "We were married 6 years. I was town marshal then, gone from dawn most days chasing down some fool complaint or another, and she took sick with a fever in the middle of a summer just like this one. By the time I got home, she was already past what the doctor could do. I have wondered ever since whether it was something in the water that summer. I never proved it. I did not have the sense to look, and by the time I might have thought to, I was too deep in grief to care about arithmetic in a ledger." "I am sorry," Dorothy said, and meant it entirely, the anger she had been carrying at his high-handed manner all day dissolving into something softer. "I resigned my badge a year after that," Aaron went on, staring into the fire. "The mayor wanted me to arrest a homesteader named Salazar on a trespassing charge that was nothing but a lie, meant to shut him up because he had been telling anyone who would listen that Creed's feed had killed his goats. I told the mayor I would not do it. He told me I could turn in my star instead. I did. That took more courage than most men have," Dorothy said. "It did not feel like courage. It felt like losing everything twice in 2 years. He looked up at her then, firelight catching the tired lines around his eyes. "I do not tell people that story. I do not know why I am telling you." "Because you have been carrying it alone a long while," Dorothy said. "And carrying things alone is a hard, thankless business. Believe me, I know it as well as anyone riding this road." They did not say much more that night, but when Dorothy lay down to sleep with her saddle for a pillow, she found herself watching the shape of him across the dying fire, the set of his shoulders even in rest, and she thought, with some alarm, that she had not expected to like this stubborn, grieving man quite so much. The flash flood came on the second afternoon, exactly where the road dipped to cross the Cimarron Wash, a dry gash of sand and cottonwood roots that had not seen water in 3 weeks. The storm that caused it had broken over the mountains an hour before, invisible to them behind a ridge, and by the time Aaron heard the sound, a low grinding roar like a train, it was already too late to simply turn the wagon around. "Get the boy up on the high bank now," he shouted, already hauling on the wagon brake, but the horses had heard the water too and were fighting the traces in panic. Dorothy was off her mule in an instant, running not away from the wash but toward it, toward the wagon, because she had seen Sammy freeze on the seat, the reins tangled around his wrist where he had grabbed at them without thinking. "Sammy, jump to me now. Do not think, just jump," she called, and the boy, terrified past sense, finally obeyed, half falling into her arms hard enough to knock them both down in the sand. She rolled, kept her grip on him, and hauled him bodily up the bank as the first brown wall of water came around the bend, faster than any man could run. Aaron had the horses half unhitched by then, working with a speed that spoke of a lifetime of ranch emergencies, but the wagon itself, with the evidence box still under its seat, was going to go into the flood if he did not act in the next few seconds. "Leave it!" Dorothy screamed at him from the bank. Sammy clutched against her side. "Aaron, leave the wagon, it is not worth your life." He did not leave it. He got the horses free, slapped them hard toward the bank, and then, with the water already swirling around the wagon wheels, he wrenched the tin box out from under the seat, tucked it against his chest, and threw himself sideways off the wagon just as the current caught it and spun it, groaning, downstream. He hit the bank hard, the box still clamped in both arms, water surging up to his waist before Dorothy got a hand on his collar, and hauled with everything she had, Sammy grabbing his other arm, until the three of them collapsed together in the wet sand above the flood line, the wagon already vanishing around the bend in a tangle of splintering wood. For a long moment none of them spoke. Aaron was breathing hard, the evidence box still clutched to his chest, rain beginning to needle down around them in fat, cold drops. "You could have died for that box," Dorothy said, when she finally found her voice, and it came out angrier than she meant it to, because the fear had not yet drained out of her. "The box is the only thing standing between Creed and every ranch on this road," Aaron said, "including mine. It is not worth your life, and I will not be the one who has to write a letter telling some judge you drowned proving a point," Dorothy snapped. And then, because her hands were shaking and she could not seem to stop them, she reached out and gripped his arm, not to pull him anywhere, just to feel that he was solid and alive and there. Aaron looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face, rain running down both of them, and something passed between them that neither one named out loud, not yet. "I am sorry," he said finally. "I should have asked what you thought before I went after it. I'm used to deciding things fast in the moment and not asking anybody's opinion." "You are used to being the only lawman in a room," Dorothy said. "I am not one of your deputies, Aaron Dunlap. I am the reason there is a case at all." "I know it," he said, and this time there was no argument left in his voice, only a kind of tired honesty. "I am trying to learn it." They lost the wagon and one packhorse to the flood, but the evidence box, wrapped in oilcloth and lashed shut, had kept dry inside Aaron's coat the whole time. They made camp early that night on the high ground above the wash, wet and shivering, and it was Dorothy who took charge of getting a fire going in the rain, showing Sammy how to shave dry tinder from the heartwood of a fallen branch, while Aaron rubbed down the surviving horses and mule. "You handle a crisis better than most men I served with," Aaron said later, crouched across the small fire from her, his voice quieter now, almost wondering. "I have had practice," Dorothy said. "A cook who panics starves a crew. A vet who panics loses the patient. I learned a long time ago that falling apart can wait until the emergency is over." "And does it?" "Wait." She looked at him a long moment, the firelight soft on her tired face. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes it catches up with you at 2 in the morning, 3 weeks later when you are least expecting it." "I know that hour," Aaron said, and they both laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that comes from two people who have found, unexpectedly, someone else who understands the particular loneliness of carrying too much for too long. The lost wagon set them back the better part of a day, on foot and horseback now, Sammy riding double behind Dorothy, while Aaron led the two surviving horses laden with what supplies they had saved. It was mid-afternoon on the third day when they came within sight of a small cluster of buildings around a well and a windmill, the Alvarez homestead, where Dorothy had first met Sammy weeks before, and where they had planned to stop for water and a hot meal before pushing on toward Fort Union. They found the yard eerily quiet. No dogs barked. No children ran to meet them, though Dorothy remembered the widow Alvarez had 4 of them, the youngest barely walking. "Something is wrong," Dorothy said, and was already sliding off her mule before Aaron could answer. They found the widow Alvarez inside her small adobe house, gray-faced and sweating despite the summer heat, 2 of her children curled listless on a pallet beside her, the youngest crying weakly in a way that spoke of exhaustion rather than temper. "Senora Boone," the widow said, struggling to sit up when Dorothy came through the door. "Thank God, we have been sick 3 days. I did not know who to send for." Dorothy was already at her side, checking her pulse, the whites of her eyes, the dryness of her tongue. "What have you been drinking?" "Only well water, or have you had anything from Creed's station?" "Only the well," the widow said, "but it has tasted strange this last month, bitter. I thought it was only the dry season." Dorothy's stomach went cold. She strode outside to the well itself, hauled up a bucket, and studied the water in the fading light. It had the faintest chalky sheen to it, the same look she had seen in the tainted tonic bottle in her saddlebag. "The alkali spring Creed uses for his tonic," she said slowly, as Aaron came to stand beside her. "It has to feed the same underground channel as this well. It is not only the cattle he is poisoning, Aaron. It is people." Aaron's face went hard in a way she had not seen before, not anger exactly, but a cold, focused resolve. "Then this is not only about your herd samples and the boy's testimony anymore. This is about every family on this road drinking from a well he has fouled to save himself a few dollars on cattle tonic." They spent that night at the Alvarez homestead instead of pushing on, Dorothy doing what she could for the sick family with the limited supplies in her instrument case. Mostly clean boiled water, willow bark tea for the fever, and calm, steady reassurance that did more good than any medicine she had with her. Aaron helped haul fresh water from a spring a mile distant that Dorothy pronounced safe, and helped the widow's oldest boy, a lad of 12, get the animals fed and settled, working alongside him with the same patient competence Dorothy had noticed in him from the very first day at his ranch. Near midnight, with the household finally quiet and the children's fevers beginning to break, Dorothy stepped outside for air and found Aaron sitting on the low wall beside the well, looking up at a sky that had, for once, gone clear and full of stars. "They will live," Dorothy said, settling beside him. "Another day, maybe 2, and they will be weak, but they will live." "Because of you," Aaron said. "Because we got here in time," Dorothy corrected. "Because you carried water half the night without complaint, and because a 14-year-old boy was brave enough to tell the truth about what he saw, even knowing what it might cost him. It was never only me, Aaron. It has never been only me on this whole road." He was quiet a moment, and then he said, in a low voice that seemed to cost him something to produce, "I have spent 2 years telling myself I could not save Emily because I was not there, and telling myself the safest thing I could do for anyone I cared about was to keep them at arm's length, where I could not fail them the way I failed her. I have been doing that to you the whole ride out here, deciding things, trying to keep you out of harm's reach as if that were the same thing as caring for you properly." "It is not the same thing," Dorothy said softly. "I do not need you to keep me out of harm's reach, Aaron. I have walked into harm's reach my whole life on purpose because somebody has to, and I have never once needed a man to do it for me. What I would like," and here her voice wavered just slightly, "is a man who will walk into it beside me and trust that I know what I am doing there as well as he does." Aaron turned to look at her then, and in the starlight his face had none of its usual careful guard on it. "I think," he said slowly, "that I would like to be that man, if you will let me learn how without deciding I already know." Dorothy studied him a long moment, and then, because the night was quiet and the fear of the flood and the sickness had stripped away some of her own careful guard as well, she reached over and took his hand, rough and strong and still faintly damp from hauling water, and held it. "I will let you learn," she said, slowly, "and you will let me tell you when you are doing it wrong." "That," Aaron said with the ghost of a smile, "I believe I can manage." They stayed only long enough the next morning to be sure the Alvarez children were mending, and to write a hasty letter of warning for the widow to send with her oldest boy to the next homestead down the road, before pushing on toward Fort Union with renewed urgency. It was no longer only about a dying herd, or even about the boy's testimony. It was about a fouled well that might already be sickening families all along the military road, and about a man who had known and said nothing. They were less than a day from Fort Union, crossing an open stretch of grassland where the road ran straight and exposed between two low ridges, when three riders came out from behind a stand of cottonwoods ahead of them, positioning themselves squarely across the way. "That is Jesse Colby," Aaron said quietly, recognizing the lead rider's rangy shape and the way he sat his horse like a man who enjoyed being looked at. "Creed's foreman, Mr. Dunlap." Colby's voice carried easy and unhurried across the distance as they drew closer, the kind of voice that had never in its life expected to be denied anything. "Miss Boone, I will thank you to hand over that boy and whatever you are carrying in that box under your coat." "On whose authority?" Aaron asked, reining his horse to a stop a careful 30 feet off, close enough to talk, far enough to react. Colby produced a folded paper with a flourish, as if he had been waiting all morning for the chance. "Judge Pruitt's order right here. Says the boy Ray's is bound over as Mr. Creed's indentured hand until his debt is worked off, and any property of Mr. Creed's found in your possession is to be returned forthwith. That would include whatever you have got wrapped up in that box." Aaron did not reach for a weapon. He reached instead into his own coat and produced the folded, wax-sealed writ Judge Marrow had given him 3 days before, holding it up so the morning sun caught the territorial seal pressed into it. "Judge Pruitt is a magistrate of Alma Vista Township," Aaron said, his voice gone flat and precise in a way Dorothy recognized from the courtroom, the sound of a man falling back into old, familiar authority. "This road is a federal military road, under territorial and Army jurisdiction from the moment it leaves town limits. Pruitt's order is worth exactly nothing out here, and you know it, because Creed would not have sent you 3 miles onto this road with a town magistrate's paper if he had a real one to send instead." Colby's easy smile flickered just slightly. "I do not much care whose paper is bigger. I care about that box." "Then you had best care about the fact that interfering with a witness and evidence under a territorial judge's escort, on a federal road, in the middle of a poisoning investigation, is exactly the kind of federal offense that gets a man sent to the territorial prison at Santa Fe instead of back to his boss's supply station," Aaron said. "You are welcome to try it, Mr. Colby. I expect the Army post at Fort Union, less than a day's ride from here, would be very interested to hear that Silas Creed sent armed men to intercept a court-ordered escort on their own supply road." Thunder rumbled somewhere behind the ridge, the storm that had been building all morning finally announcing itself, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall, hissing faintly in the dry grass. Colby's eyes flicked toward Dorothy and toward the boy Sammy, who had gone very still and very pale beside her, and then back to Aaron. "Mr. Creed said you would not have the stomach for a fight anymore, Dunlap. Said you turned in your star rather than do a hard thing once, and a man like that does not have it in him twice." "I turned in my star rather than do a wrong thing," Aaron said, and Dorothy heard the old iron come back into his voice, tempered now by everything the last 3 days had taught him. "There is a considerable difference, and I would be glad to explain it to you at greater length in front of the post commander, if you would like to ride the rest of the way with us." For a long moment nobody moved, rain beginning to fall in earnest now, lightning flickering pale behind the clouds to the west. Then Colby's second rider, a younger man who had said nothing the whole exchange, spoke up in a low voice Dorothy barely caught. "Jesse, that writ looks real, territorial seal and all. I did not sign on to go up against the army." Colby held Aaron's gaze another long moment, and then, with the particular grace of a man salvaging what dignity he could from a losing hand, he folded Prute's worthless paper back into his coat. "This is not finished," he said. "It will be finished by tomorrow evening, one way or another," Aaron said, "when Miss Boone testifies at the fort and that spring water gets tested. You might tell Mr. Creed that if he has any sense left, he will get ahead of it himself rather than waiting for the army to come find him." Colby wheeled his horse without another word, and the three riders vanished back the way they had come, swallowed quickly by the thickening rain. Dorothy let out a long breath she had not realized she was holding, and found her hands were shaking again, though this time it was not fear alone but something fiercer, something close to triumph. "You did not draw your gun once," she said. "Did not need to," Aaron said, though she could see now that his hands, too, were less than perfectly steady on his reins. A gun would have made it a fight about who was faster. The paper made it a fight about who was right. I learned a long time ago, wearing a badge, that the second kind of fight is the only kind worth winning. "You almost sent me and Sammy ahead alone back at the wash," Dorothy said, watching him carefully now. "Did you think just now about doing the same, sending us on while you stood here?" Aaron was quiet a moment, and she could see the honest struggle in him, the old instinct warring with the promise he had made her only the night before. "I thought about it," he admitted, "for about half a second, and then I remembered what you told me about walking into harm's reach beside someone instead of deciding for them, and I did not do it. You were both right here the whole time, where you chose to be. I am learning, Dorothy. Slowly, like I said." "Slowly will do," Dorothy said, and found she was smiling despite the rain running down her collar, despite the fear still humming under her skin. "So long as it keeps happening." They reached Fort Union late the following afternoon, rain-soaked and travel-worn, the great earthen ramparts of the Star Fort rising out of the plain like something out of a dream after 3 days of open road. Aaron presented Judge Marrow's writ to the officer of the day, and within the hour they were seated in the office of the post surgeon, a weathered army doctor named Major Whitfield who also served, by necessity of the territory's scarcity, as the nearest thing to a government veterinary authority within 200 miles. Whitfield examined the sealed tonic sample first, sniffing it, then testing a drop against a strip of treated paper he kept for exactly this purpose, watching it change color with a grim satisfaction that had nothing pleasant in it. "Arsenic," he confirmed. "Cut into the tonic base at levels that would sicken cattle slowly and kill calves outright, especially in the summer heat when animals drink more. Whoever mixed this either did not understand what he was doing or did not care." "He understood," Dorothy said, and laid her notes on his desk, the affidavits she had gathered from 5 different ranches, along with a written account, taken down in her own hand and signed with a careful, determined signature from Sammy Ray's himself. Sammy told his story to Major Whitfield in a voice that shook only at the start, steadying as he went, describing the alkali spring, the mixing barrels behind Creed's station, the warning he had been given about what would happen if he ever spoke of it. "And the well water at the Alvarez homestead," Aaron added when the boy had finished, 2 days back down the road. "Same taste, same chalky look as this sample. There are children sick out there right now, Major, and I would wager every homestead between here and Creed's station is drawing from the same poisoned channel." Major Whitfield sat back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "This is not a matter for a post surgeon alone anymore," he said. "This is a matter for the territorial marshal and likely a federal inquiry, given that Supply Road falls under Army jurisdiction, and Mr. Creed holds a government contract to supply this very post. I will send a rider to Santa Fe tonight, and I will have a detachment ride out to that spring and to Creed's station by morning, with orders to seal both until this is properly investigated." He looked between Aaron and Dorothy with something like respect. You have done a difficult and dangerous piece of work, both of you, getting this evidence here intact. I do not imagine it was an easy road." "No," Dorothy said, glancing at Aaron. "It was not, but it was the right one." The detachment rode out from Fort Union at first light the next morning, Aaron and Dorothy riding with them as far as Creed's supply station, because the territorial marshal's office had wired ahead requesting their presence to formally identify the tonic samples and confirm the location of the alkali spring. They arrived to find the station in a state of barely controlled chaos. Silas Creed himself standing on the porch of his store in a fine coat, entirely unsuited to the muddy yard, already protesting his innocence to a young lieutenant who looked entirely unmoved by the performance. "This is an outrage," Creed was saying as they rode up. "I run an honest business supplying half this territory, and you come here on the word of a runaway boy and some traveling horse doctor who cannot even hold a proper license." "The territory does not license veterinarians, Mr. Creed, because it has never troubled itself to build a school that would train one," Dorothy said, dismounting and walking straight up to the porch steps without hesitation, "which has not stopped me from doctoring livestock honestly and well for 6 years, nor from recognizing arsenic poisoning when I see cattle dying of it on 5 different ranches that all bought your tonic. I do not need a license to know the truth. I only needed a witness willing to tell it, and evidence you could not talk your way around." Creed's eyes flicked to Sammy, who stood close beside Aaron's horse but did not flinch under the man's gaze, and something in the boy's steady, frightened courage seemed to finally crack the last of Creed's bluster. The lieutenant's men found the mixing barrels behind the station within the hour, the alkali spring capped with government tape before noon, and by evening Silas Creed had been placed under arrest, not by Aaron, who stood back and let the army do its proper work, but by the young lieutenant, acting on the marshal's authority that had come by wire from Santa Fe. "You could have arrested him yourself," Dorothy said quietly, as they watched Creed loaded, protesting still, into an army wagon. "You still remember how." "I remember how," Aaron agreed. "But it was never my badge to wear again, and it did not need to be. This was never only my fight to finish, Dorothy. It was yours as much as mine, maybe more, since you were the one who found the poison in the first place, and the one who has been carrying the proof of it on your own back for weeks before I ever met you." They stayed 2 more days at Fort Union while the formal depositions were taken, Dorothy's testimony filling 4 pages in the marshal's careful hand, and while Major Whitfield arranged for a proper government supply of clean tonic and dip to be distributed to the affected ranches until Creed's monopoly could be broken by law. It was there in the shade of the fort's long porch on their last evening before starting home that Aaron finally said the thing he had been circling for 3 days. "I do not want this to end when we get back to Alma Vista," he said. "The case, I mean. No, that is not what I mean at all." He stopped, frustrated with himself, and Dorothy, watching him fumble for words with a fondness she no longer bothered to hide, took pity on him. "What do you mean, Aaron?" "I mean you," he said finally, simply. "I do not want you to ride out of my life the way you rode into it, doctoring my herd, and then moving on to the next ranch down the road. I know you value your independence, and I am not asking you to give up your calling. I would not ask that of you even if you offered, because I have watched you work these last 5 days, and I think the world needs Dorothy Boone riding this road with her instrument case a great deal more than it needs one more rancher's wife staying home to mind a stove." "That is a strange sort of courting speech," Dorothy said, though her heart had begun to beat hard and fast against her ribs. "I am not a smooth-talking man," Aaron admitted. "I have not courted anybody in 8 years, and the last time I tried, I was 23 and made an entire fool of myself over Emily Cardenas at a church social. So you will have to forgive me if this comes out clumsy. What I am asking, Dorothy, is whether you would consider making my ranch your home base, not your only stop but your home, and whether you would consider making room in your travels and in your life for a rancher who has learned, slower than he would like. How to stand beside a woman instead of standing in front of her. Dorothy was quiet a long moment, looking out over the darkening plain toward the mountains where the last of the day's storm was still flickering, distant and beautiful now instead of dangerous. I lost my father to a wound that turned bad because there was no doctor within 2 days' ride when he needed one, she said finally. I have spent every year since telling myself that meant I could never stay in one place, that staying meant failing someone somewhere down the road who needed me and could not reach me in time. But I have watched you these last 5 days too, Aaron. I have watched you haul water half the night for a sick family that was not even yours, and hold a paper up against 3 armed men because you knew it mattered more than any pistol, and change the way you treat me because I asked you to and you actually listened. I do not think loving you would mean staying in one place and giving up the road. I think it might mean having a place worth riding home to for the first time in a long while. Is that a yes? Aaron asked, and there was so much open hope in his voice that Dorothy felt something in her chest, some old careful wall she had built brick by brick over years of riding alone, finally come down. It is a yes, she said, to trying. To building something together on your ranch, if you will let it be ours and not only yours. A place where I can keep my instruments and my case, and ride out when a rancher 3 days off needs me, and know there is someone here who trusts my judgment enough not to worry himself sick every time I am gone longer than a week. I cannot promise I will never worry, Aaron said, reaching for her hand there on the fort's porch, the last light of the storm painting the sky behind him in streaks of gold and violet. But I can promise I will not let the worry turn back into deciding things for you. That much I have learned, if nothing else, on this road. They rode back toward Alma Vista 3 days later, the storm season finally beginning to break into long, clear evenings, Sammy Ray's riding with them, since the boy had nowhere else to go, and Aaron had quietly offered him steady work and a roof, an offer Dorothy had seconded before Aaron had even finished making it. They stopped again at the Alvarez homestead, where the children were fully recovered and the well, freshly tested by an army detail on its way back from Creed's station, had been declared safe once the poisoned spring channel feeding it was sealed for good. The territorial court proceedings against Silas Creed took the better part of 2 months to conclude, delayed by lawyers and by the slow business of frontier justice. But conclude they did, with Creed convicted of criminal fraud and endangerment, and stripped of his government supply contract entirely. His station and its remaining stock seized to help pay restitution to the ranchers and families who had lost cattle, wells, and in 2 tragic cases along the road. Family members to the tainted water over the preceding 2 years. It was not everything Dorothy might have wished. No punishment could restore what had been lost, but it was justice of a kind the territory rarely managed to deliver, and it came, in no small part, because a traveling vet and a widowed rancher had refused to let a judge's uncomfortable order become an excuse to look away from each other, or from the truth. Dorothy testified twice more before the case closed, once at Fort Union and once, remarkably, before a territorial commission in Santa Fe investigating the broader pattern of contaminated supplies along military roads throughout the territory. Her careful, detailed records of 5 separate ranches becoming, in the commission's own words, some of the clearest evidence they had yet received of the human cost of unregulated frontier commerce. It was, Aaron told her with unconcealed pride, the closest thing to a proper veterinary license the territory was ever likely to grant a woman in their lifetimes, and Dorothy, though she laughed it off, kept the commission's letter of commendation folded carefully in the same box where she kept her father's old instruments. By the time the last of the summer storms rolled through, and the range began to green with the delayed blessing of all that rain, Aaron Dunlap's herd had recovered under Dorothy's steady care, supplemented now by clean, government-inspected tonic freed from Creed's poisoned monopoly, and the ranch itself had begun, slowly, to change shape around the two of them. It was Dorothy's idea, first spoken half in jest one evening over supper with Tomas and Wyatt and Pete and Sammy, all crowded around the table she had insisted on building longer, to open part of the old barn as a proper way station for travelers on the military road, offering fresh water tested clean, honest supplies at fair prices, and veterinary care for any rancher or drover who needed it. Rather than leaving the whole stretch of road dependent again on whatever merchant next tried to build a monopoly out of other men's desperation. "You are talking about turning my cattle ranch into a store," Aaron had said, though he was smiling as he said it. "I am talking about turning our ranch into something the whole road can rely on," Dorothy had corrected, "so that no family ever again has to wonder whether the water they are drinking or the medicine they are buying is going to kill them, because some other family cared enough to build something honest instead." It took the better part of a year to build properly, a solid stone addition to the barn with its own well dug fresh, and tested 3 times over. Shelves for honest supplies bought wholesale from Santa Fe rather than skimmed and cut for profit, and a small examination room where Dorothy kept her instruments organized with the same careful precision her father had taught her, ready for whatever rancher rode in needing her help. Aaron ran the cattle side of things as he always had, with Tomas and Wyatt and Pete and young Sammy, who had taken to ranch work with the same steady courage he had shown testifying against Creed. But more and more of his days were spent helping Dorothy with the way station too, hauling supplies, keeping the books, learning enough basic doctoring at her side that he could assist her competently on the increasingly frequent days when 2 sick animals arrived from opposite directions at the same time. They married that autumn, a small ceremony at the ranch itself rather than in town, with Judge Merrow himself riding out to perform it, remarking with dry amusement that it was not the first time he had ordered 2 stubborn people together, only to watch them fall thoroughly in love against their own better judgment. Widow Alvarez and her children came, and half the ranching families along the road who had reason to be grateful, and Sammy Reyes stood up as something close to a son at Aaron's side, beaming with a pride that had nothing left in it of the frightened boy who had once twisted his hat in his hands, afraid to tell the truth. Dorothy wore, at her own insistence, a plain traveling dress rather than anything more elaborate, because she told Aaron with a look that dared him to object, to be back on horseback checking a neighboring rancher's sick mare within the week, wedding or no wedding, and she did not see the sense in ruining a fine dress doing it. "I would not have you any other way," Aaron told her, standing beside her in the golden autumn light with the ranch. Their ranch, spread out behind them, healthy cattle grazing on grass that had finally recovered from a summer of poison and flood and fear. "I hired a traveling vet to save my herd, Dorothy Boone, and instead you went and saved a great deal more than that." "What did I save?" Dorothy asked, smiling up at him, "besides 40 head of cattle and one very stubborn rancher's pride." "You saved the part of me I thought I buried with Emily," Aaron said, quiet and certain, no crowd of wedding guests able to touch the truth of it in his voice. "The part that believed a person could stand beside someone else without either one of them losing themselves in it. I thought that was gone from me for good. You proved me wrong, one flood and one storm and one impossible standoff at a time." Dorothy reached up and touched his face, weathered now with new lines of laughter as well as old ones of grief, and found she had no clever answer left in her, only the plain and steady truth of it. "Then I am glad," she said, "that the judge was stubborn enough to order us both onto that road together, and that you were stubborn enough to learn how to walk it beside me instead of ahead of me." "I am a slow learner," Aaron admitted, drawing her close as the small gathered crowd began to call for them to come and eat the supper the ranch hands had helped Dorothy prepare, the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread carrying on the evening air. "You are exactly slow enough," Dorothy said, and kissed him there in front of the whole gathered road, the military road that had nearly killed them twice and had instead, against every reasonable expectation, given them each other, a rebuilt herd, a way station that would keep families safe for years to come, and a home that belonged at last and equally to them both. The way station prospered in the years that followed, though this part of the story needs no long telling. Only the simple truth that travelers along that stretch of road came to know the name Dunlap and Boone the way they had once, fearfully, known the name Creed, except now the name meant something worth trusting. Ranchers rode in from 3 days distant when their herds sickened, certain of an honest diagnosis and a fair price. Families passing through on the military road filled their water barrels without fear. And on quiet evenings, when the summer storms rolled through with their lightning and their sudden, drenching rain, Aaron Dunlap and Dorothy Boone would sit together on the porch of the home they had built as equals, watching the same lightning that had once nearly taken everything from them light up a sky grown, at last, familiar and safe. And they would think, each of them, that whatever the judge's gavel had set in motion that hot morning in Alma Vista, it had turned out, against every reasonable expectation, to be the truest piece of justice either of them had ever seen delivered.